Hi, Derek. Welcome to the 100X show.
Hey, thanks for having me here.
Yeah, it has been my pleasure. Token Metrics is basically big fan of Moonriver, Moonbeam. I think what you guys are building is amazing, and I'm also a personal fan, and I'm also personally invested. So my first question for you will be regarding your background, regarding your aspiration, and what kind of got you towards building Moonbeam and also launching Moonriver. So in this question, kind of feel free to kind of answer this aspect, like why is there a good founder market fit from your end?
Yeah, I think I have a few thoughts on that. Well, just by way of background, I've been building software for a long time now. So that's over 20 years at this point. Different software companies. I've started a couple. A lot of that experience was in just the regular Web 2 space, so particularly cloud technology companies. But the theme throughout has just been building software, complex systems, building up teams, technical teams in particular, to tackle larger software development efforts. So that's my background. And the thing I would say that is the notable experience I had was I did start before the present venture. I did start a company called Fuse. And that grew to be a fairly substantive Web 2 cloud technology company. I think there was about 700 people when it was at its largest. So I learned a lot in that process. I went through the whole cycle of two of us, like in an apartment, starting it, getting initial customers, getting initial VC funding, and then, growing this company from there. And I would say that is a little bit unusual. In the Web3 space, it tends to be a lot of technologists, first-time founders. So I do feel like I have, sometimes I feel like I have a little bit of a leg up on folks just because I think I've seen more things. So, you kind of, you have this company building experience, I come in with some ideas about things, and we can get into this more, but in particular, I find that a lot of Web3 founders, they don't think as much about go-to-market, like marketing and go-to-market kind of things. And yeah, of course, the tech is the most important part, but you need to have a strategy across these different elements, even the non-technical elements like a go-to-market strategy. And so that's something I think that my experience has helped with. And so yeah, the story of the crypto story is that this company, the Fuse, that I started with one other guy named Steve Kokinos, and he left at some point to start a crypto project of his own. So he's now the CEO of a project called Algorand. He left Fuse in about 2018. That's a pretty well-known layer one these days, based in Boston here, like I am. So that's what got me into it. Is just this guy. I'd worked with him for many, many years, and he left, started a crypto project, and he couldn't stop talking, of course, about how much fun he was having, and that I had to kind of get with the program here and get with get into this new exciting space. And so he finally wore me down, and that's how I came in. It's just from this friendship with my former co-founder. And that led to starting the company PureStake back in just the beginning of 2019.
Yeah, that's amazing. I kind of got a sense that there is a very strong founder market fit in case of Moonbeam. So you did touch upon the VC part. So how would you say, so there has been recent debate about Web3 and the role of VC. Do you think in crypto VCs typically tend to add more value relative to, let's say, Web 2? Or do you think it's a bit of a myth, or would love to just have some thoughts on that?
It's a really good question. I would say that my thoughts have evolved on this question as I've gotten more experience in Web3. I think you can, build a project without VCs, and obviously there's multiple examples of this, and that is something that's kind of unique and very special about Web3, that you have these fundraising mechanisms that are built into the protocols where you can do that. It's really not an option, in regular, for a Web 2 company. I think it can be done. Certainly if you take this community first approach. That being said, I do think that VCs have a role to play. Several of the VCs that we work with have been, quite helpful and supportive along the way for us. And then you realize then, even as we in turn now create an ecosystem of our own, we want to make sure that the project teams that are starting to build, new projects, protocols, in our ecosystem also have similar support. But there is, I mean, it does, the dynamic is different. I mean, in Web2, when you're fundraising, that's the only game in town, right? You're trying to raise money from VCs. Here, I think there's, you have to strike, an appropriate balance depending on the goals of your project, between more of a community-oriented approach versus a VC-oriented approach. We actually took different approaches even on the two networks that we have in terms of Moonriver and Moonbeam.
You just mentioned Moonbeam, Moonriver. I think that is the main question. What's your 40,000 feet overview of what is actually Moonbeam and Moonriver?
So the projects themselves. Those two projects are, first of all, to contextualize, we are parachains on the Kusama and Polkadot networks. So we're definitely very deep into those ecosystems, and our project can't even function in its present form outside of the context of those two ecosystems. So the way to think of it for your listeners who may not be familiar, the architecture of Polkadot is that you have this main chain that's called the relay chain. That's the backbone of the system. And then you have member blockchains, multiple of them, that attach to that backbone relay chain. And by being part of one system, they're able to interoperate with each other. They get shared security. There's a number of kind of benefits of being, one part of a larger system. So that's context for Moonbeam and Moonriver. But what we actually do, so the core feature set of both of those platforms is to provide, first and foremost, our goal was to provide the most Ethereum-compatible environment we could for smart contract development. And so we saw that as early on, we saw that there was this, kind of obvious need within the Polkadot ecosystem to provide this kind of smart contract capability. So within Polkadot, you have a choice. You can either use this development framework called Substrate to build a whole chain, as I was just describing, one of these parachains. But I think what we realized is that for a lot of use cases and for a lot of developers, that wasn't necessarily a good fit, and the smart contract platform would be the better fit. So it was kind of almost an obvious niche to fill, and so we said, okay, let's focus on that as a first feature set, and that's where there's quite a bit of traction on both Moonriver and even Moonbeam in the last couple of weeks on developers deploying different protocols onto both of those platforms.
So I feel like Solidity has now become like a JavaScript for crypto. How do you kind of see it? Do you think in 10 years' time we are going to see more usage of it? Or do you think it would be some other programming language, let's say Rust? And also regarding the operating system, do you think EVM will be like a winner-take-all operating system for crypto? Because we have traditionally seen even in PCs and mobile phone, there are just a couple of operating systems that kind of dominate. With the deployment of Moonbeam and Moonriver, are you kind of bullish on the EVM space, and that's why it was the decision just to focus on the EVM platform, EVM's compatible platform?
Yeah, a few thoughts on that to explain. I would say, I'll answer the last part first. So the focus on the EVM was definitely a very practical choice. That I think this goes back to that what we started the conversation with, this experience that I have from previous ventures, and that is that I think people tend to underestimate what it takes to evangelize and establish a new tech stack. There's like a lot of effort that is required to establish a new tech stack, and so I think for us, going with this EVM compatible approach, that made everything easier basically. So that's the development tools, like the knowledge of developers, even subtler things you wouldn't think of, like security auditors, that they even know like what to do to even audit like the contracts. Infrastructure players, all sorts of like different infrastructure providers that are already compatible, wallets, API, like RPC service providers, all of these players that already have compatibility with that tech stack. So then that's like, every one of those things I mentioned would have been friction before, right? If you're trying to teach someone a new thing or get adoption of a new thing versus an established thing. So that was definitely a practical choice on our part, to go with that route. We realized we wanted to be, really focus on reducing the friction for adoption. And I think, when you look at Web2 companies at scale, that's something they're pretty good at, right? Is, where are the points of friction and how do we reduce those to make it, easier to adopt? But I want to go back to the first question you asked around, where do I see things going? And a couple points I'd make there. One is that sometimes I think people conflate chains and technology stacks. And so even right now, like the Ethereum technology stack is implemented by a whole number of chains outside of Ethereum mainnet, right? So you have Ethereum mainnet, you have the L2s now, you have Avalanche C chain, you have Polygon, you have BSC, you have Moonbeam. And so I think there's going to be far fewer tech stacks than there are chains that implement those tech stacks. That's one thought I have. And I think sometimes people have conflated those two and said, well, everything's just going to be on Ethereum. But no, I think for a successful tech stack, you're going to see many chains adopt it. And I think I agree with you that while there'll be many chains, there may only be some smaller handful of tech stacks that actually get the critical mass and adoption around them. And I think if you look at that, though, the EVM is the one with the most adoption right now. So it's very, very hard for me to imagine a future where that does not continue to have an important role to play. Other tech stacks that I think are here to stay as well would be things like Cosmos SDK and Substrate. Basically at this point, if you're building a chain, I think it's quite difficult to imagine not like using one of those two frameworks. I mean, that's going to reduce your implementation time to like 10% probably of what it would take to do it from scratch, if not more. And you'll have like more features. It's already, been audited and all of these other things. So, for chains, those are the two frameworks. And then for other tech stacks, I mean, yeah, maybe the Solana tech stack. I mean, there's probably like room for maybe another one or two, but all of these like many, many dozens that exist now, it's hard for me to see those continuing, to all have like a lot of adoption.
Yeah, that's a very interesting take. So one of the things that has been like I'm seeing a debate on Twitter is regarding chains. So do you kind of see chains like Ethereum and Solana and Avalanche? Do you kind of see these chains as countries or kind of see it as cities? Would there be like 100, 200 chains, or do you potentially can see thousands of chains, let's say in next decade? Or do you think you can kind of start to see them as nations rather than cities? Like what's your take on that? Like how many different chains we might perhaps have?
Well, I like the analogy of chains as cities to some extent, because at least you're getting away from this idea of, there's only going to be like one or two. I mean, so I think that to me is just clearly wrong. So the cities concept, I mean, you start to at least get people in the mindset of, hey, like, there can be many of these things. They can be different. They maybe are good at different things. And I think that's the correct direction to go in. I think the thing where it breaks down, though, for me is that I liken it to computers. I think that thinking of blockchains as computers in some way is useful. Where back when in the early days of computing, it was like this, right? There were just like very, very few of these things, and you had people saying things like, "Well, there's only ever going to be a market for like 5 or 6 of these because they're so expensive to maintain. You need an army of experts." And I think even smart people at the time were saying things like that. But you realize that when you create something that's useful, that you get like this combined ingenuity of like everyone working towards making that thing better, cheaper, faster, more accessible until now we have these things everywhere. And so it may not be exactly the same in terms of everyone having like a blockchain in their pocket kind of idea. Obviously, it's a network also, but I think that if the history of computing tells us anything, it's that once you have something useful like this, it tends to kind of like multiply and occupy like many different niches, right? Like and take different forms. And so I'm pretty sure something similar will happen. And so that's where the city analogy might start to break down a little bit. Maybe not be quite as applicable, but I think it's a good start at least, right? Because then at least you're getting away from, there's like going to be like 2 or 3 of these things. It's like that's just not right.
Right. So yeah, I also wanted to take your thoughts on the EVM platform landscape. So we already saw AVAX C chain. We are kind of like Solana might have Neon Labs soon. We have Aurora, and even within Polkadot and Kusama, we perhaps will have A-Star and Shiden, which are slightly different. So what do you think? How is Moonriver, Moonbeam different? And what would you say that your competitive advantage would be, either in regards to tokenomics or either in regards to innovation or tech stack? Like how will you kind of see your competitive advantage in this EVM platform world?
Yeah. So few thoughts on that. Well, I don't really consider like other parachain teams within the ecosystem to necessarily be, competitors. And we don't think of them that way. But obviously, I think within the Kusama ecosystem, I think we're known for the people that we really specialized our chain like to this like EVM use case. So that means even things like changing the underlying account and key structure to match the Ethereum accounts and keys. That was an important part of our strategy in optimizing the whole environment to provide this kind of maximally compatible implementation. But I think the thing that we've been thinking more about is more how do we position ourselves, or how do we think of ourselves relative to other L1 options, like you were mentioning. So you have these newer projects like Aurora Neon, as you mentioned, but there are other established chains like BSC or Avalanche C Chain. That you mentioned. And I think that the answer to that question of like how we're different is that it's because we're a parachain on Polkadot, because we're part of this larger system, there's unique things that we can do that those other platforms can't do. Take an example of like BSC, right? So BSC is ultimately a standalone network. It's actually a Geth fork, right? I mean, they've kind of forked the main Ethereum client and created their own network with different parameters, right? So it has this fewer number of block producers. It has a higher throughput, but it's not part of a larger system. So the thing that we're leaning heavily into this year are these cross-chain integrations, which are like made natively possible by being a parachain on Polkadot. Polkadot has this cross-chain integration mechanism called XCM. We've just shipped the first features that use this XCM capability onto Moonriver within the last month or even a few weeks for powering token transfers to start. But that's really just the tip of the iceberg. So we have a lot of
XC20? Is it the XC20 framework?
So XC20 is the first significant feature that we've shipped using XCM. So what XC20 is it's a substrate native asset. So it can be exchanged via XCM with other parachains or the relay chain. But when it lives on Moonriver or Moonbeam, it is also accessible from the EVM environment, and it looks like an ERC20. So that was our strategy for kind of bridging, this EVM world with the substrate world is, there needs to be tokens, right? Tokens, a lot of parachain teams are using the X tokens palette that's been created by the Akala team. And so there's this concept of having a substrate native asset. But, in our implementation, everything we do, we want to kind of bridge it into and make it compatible with the EVM. And so that's what XC20 is basically the ability to have this substrate native asset, but also be able to work with it from the EVM. And even that idea alone, as simple as it is already something that is quite powerful, I think, because you have all of these teams that have EVM-based protocols that are deploying, DEXs, lending and borrowing protocols, and so on. And you realize that with this XC20, they can now kind of work with all of these substrate native assets, right? So if you move substrate native assets to either Moonriver or Moonbeam, then you can basically use them directly as ERC20s inside of these existing protocols. And because of the ERC20 standard, then they're all compatible basically with all of these different like DeFi and other protocols that exist on Moonriver and Moonbeam.
Yeah, so I wanted to explore on this. So you kind of already answered the question I have, like why did it make sense to kind of build on Polkadot? But I just wanted to ask you about the interoperability and composability question. So let's say if you have different layer ones and they're kind of working together simultaneously, they can communicate between each other. Do you think that kind of also kind of create a bit of a friction when it comes to composability? Or do you think eventually that's kind of a trade-off you need to have, especially if you're trying to go for higher TPS and scalability?
There's many different ideas that different L1s have pursued. You have something like Solana, which is like the opposite end of the spectrum, right? They're saying like, let's kind of just have one instance, but let's make it really fast. I'm pretty convinced that you can't it gets back to the one computer idea. I just don't think that like the humanity's like needs in the space for forever in the future are going to be served by one computer. It's like a community computer in the form of a blockchain. It's just, that's not realistic in my mind. So you need to have many. And then I think as soon as you settle on there needs to be many, now you see different approaches being taken by different teams, right? So you can have, this is kind of sharding is like what it's called in the L1 design. So you can have a system that has homogeneous shard. So every shard looks the same. Every shard can be an EVM, right? So that's, I've heard this is a bit of the vision around like, how like a Polygon might envision things, right? You have basically, or ETH2, like one of the original designs had this idea of like, let's have all the shards, but each one will be an EVM. I think the thing that's like interesting and unique about Polkadot is that they've gone to great lengths to make it so that these shards can be different and you can specialize them to different purposes. And so in our case, we've specialized, our shard to be this EVM compatible chain, but, other teams are specializing their shards to be good at other things. And so that I think is the special thing about Polkadot. And that's the bet. I think a bet on Polkadot is a bet on the fact that there's going to be many chains, that they need to interact with each other, but that this like specialization is important too. So I think, obviously there's still many competing ideas in the market, but to me, that idea seems correct, right? And when you're a developer and you log into like an AWS, there's many different kinds of services there, right? And so if I imagine what would these look like as like Web3 services of different kinds of blockchains, this ability to specialize is extremely important. Specialize, but also being able to like combine things together.
Yeah, so when I did my deep dive on Moonbeam and Moonriver, the way I kind of described my investment thesis was, let's say, when you're basically buying Moonbeam, you're also kind of hedging against Ethereum, but you're also kind of hedging a bit against Polkadot, because you have both. You can leverage both ecosystem together, right? Like if you can migrate Ethereum projects and you can also kind of play around with other Polkadot projects, so you can get benefit from both the evolution of both the project kind of growing in tandem. Do you think that analogy will be correct? Like that kind of thinking for a lot of investors would be correct?
I think so. I mean, I think that we've had the great fortune to have a lot of great traction on both Moonriver and even Moonbeam so far. I do think that a large part of that is from this product strategy of EVM compatibility, because that again that's what like developers know. That's where there's these like mature tools. Even the end user perspective, I think people underestimate this too. That for an end user to have a setup and functioning MetaMask that they have with a backed up seed phrase and all these things, I mean that's like real work. That's real work for a lot of people. So then even if you're asking a user to set up a new wallet, that's a bunch of friction basically. And so I think that's kind of the role I think that we can play, in the Polkadot ecosystem, is that we serve as a bit of an on-ramp, right? So we represent the familiar in some sense. So people say, oh yeah, this is just like, other chains that I go to is like a Phantom or AVAX chain. They come on, but then, our hope is once they're there, then they might start to get curious and say, well, wait a minute. So what is this to be a parachain? Oh, look, I can go and transfer assets or do these things with other chains. What are those chains? And so then, we kind of lead people, kind of serve as a route for people to come into the ecosystem. And we already see that happening. There's, projects that have pretty substantive like communities formed around them that have been deployed to, Moonriver in particular, and just starting now on Moonbeam. And I can see that they're starting to, learn about these different assets, especially as we create these asset integrations now. They're that's always a great way for people to feel engaged and learn then about other projects in the ecosystem.
Yeah, that's great. That's great insight. I kind of resonate with the MetaMask wallet. I thought I already have a MetaMask wallet. It's just easier to continue rather than, like build a new wallet with Polkadot. It can get complicated. So one key question I had for you was like, how do you kind of see both Moonriver and Moonbeam evolving long term together? Because one of the concerns a lot of investors and even users have, they kind of are cautious about the fragmentation of liquidity. So, for example, they might believe that a project might build on Moonriver just to experiment, but then eventually the goal is to get on Moonbeam. So, how do you kind of see that playing out, and what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah. This has come up quite a bit. Our intention and a strategy is to maintain both of these deployments moving forward in parallel. And our belief is that the demand for credibly decentralized and secure block space, especially EVM block space, there's far more demand for that than there is availability. As you can see from just adoption happening on chains and the fees, kind of the gas prices like on those chains. So I have no concerns that the block space available on these two chains is going to be filled. I mean, it will be for sure. I think the more interesting question is, what is it going to be filled by, and will there be some difference? There is this difference in economic security between the two chains, simply because of the value of the relay chain asset, being much more valuable on Polkadot versus Kusama, and thus the prices of deploying being different. I suspect that there will be over time a concentration of certain use cases, that are different, like between the two chains. Right now, I think it's pretty opportunistic, so you see kind of everything happening. But I would not be surprised if certain use cases, such as like NFT use cases, gaming use cases in particular, we're seeing quite a bit more of these days. They don't necessarily need the same degree of economic security as like a high value DeFi use case, for example. So I'm pretty sure that we'll start to see some concentration of like-minded use cases together on chains that have the right characteristics. So that could be lower value, but cheaper transactions on Moonriver hosting things like a game, versus let's say like a large value like DeFi transaction. That's going to want the full economic security of Polkadot. So that would be a Moonbeam scenario.
Yeah, that's great. We recently had Bruno on our podcast of RMRK, and I think he also kind of shared the same thought. Like he basically was kind of referring that Kusama could actually become the hub of NFT. There's a lot of experimentation, especially when it comes to NFT going on there. This kind of takes me to the next question. So how does the foundation plan on funding the ecosystem? So we have already seen Near and AVAX having their own fund to kind of populate the chain, to kind of populate the network effect. So how does a foundation plan on spending its own token, for example, or deploying some of those funds? That would be interesting to kind of explore.
Yeah, so there is a foundation grants program that's quite active, actually, and that will certainly continue. Where we've had quite a bit of interest, particularly on teams that are looking to bootstrap themselves, so native teams that are looking to bootstrap themselves, and I expect the grant support for those teams to continue. I think what's been happening more recently is we have been in discussions with a number of if you go back to the VC point, like VCs and other folks, to create a fund that would focus specifically on like the Moonbeam, Moonriver ecosystem and help provide financial support to projects that are starting there. And so I think that's something that we definitely want to pursue. Grants are not really designed well. They're good for bootstrapping and effort, but they're not designed well for the ongoing needs of a project, right, or growth needs. And so that's where I think these folks that do that for a living, that's like a better fit, basically, right, who have that kind of expertise. And so we'll be looking to partner with folks that have that expertise to help with that continuation. So if the grants kind of bootstrap, then these kinds of organizations can carry forward with growth needs.
So are there any native projects that are building on Moonbeam and Moonriver that has gotten you very excited, that you're very excited about for the foreseeable future? Like some of the projects building on Moonbeam and Moonriver, I would love to explore that as well.
Yeah, so just to describe for people what has happened on Moonriver and now a couple weeks into Moonbeam, I would still say that DeFi is at the core of the activity. Those teams are the ones that are, I'll call them, the most aggressive to deploy. They're the ones that are moving faster than others in a sense. I think a lot of them, especially as Moonbeam just launched, we already see a number of teams vying to try to be the first mover and kind of establish themselves, on the chain as it went live. So that's still the core. I'd still say a good 70% of the activity is DeFi in one way, shape, or form. Just to highlight a couple of projects there, recently there was an announcement of a team called Moonwell. That's a very high quality team that is building a lending and borrowing protocol on both Moonriver and Moonbeam. When we see things like that, a native team also that is quite encouraging. That you have this team that's making a big bet on not only Moonbeam, but also the Kusama ecosystem. To give another example from Moonriver, I mean, there's a project on there called Rome. It is an Olympus fork, but they have done unique things. So there is a game that they're working on. So there's a whole kind of gamified mechanic around it. And just to give you some sense, I mean, this Rome project, they probably have as many people in their Discord as like we do in ours. I mean, probably something like 40,000 people. Like, so these are projects that are building substantial communities around them. And so that's kind of interesting to me. So that's DeFi. The other area I would say is that we were kind of surprised by in a good way is the kind of, I'd call it NFT metaverse gaming area in this area. That is not something that we as a team focused on. We were pretty focused on DeFi because that's where we were having most of our let's call it like business development, like go-to-market discussions. But once we launched Moonriver, we saw right away that there was these, I'll call them more community-oriented projects where, there could be an NFT collection that then was going to be used in a game. We've seen multiple of these that are pretty interesting. So we're getting smarter about this area. There's obviously a lot of happening like very quickly here, but I'll give you one example. There's a project called Kusama that was a community project. We didn't know that team at all on Moonriver. And at this point, so they have NFT collections, but then they've also created the game part, and the metaverse part is that they've taken basically Minecraft, like the Minecraft engine, and created basically an ability to use NFTs that are on Moonriver as both like your avatar, but also like the weapons and things you can equip. And it's a fully playable like game and metaverse experience at this point. And so I think, over the weekend, I saw that, they had a server with 250 people. I think there was 270 people that showed up for 250 available slots to play this, to take part in this event and play this game. And so I think that that's like, maybe say 250 people, but, you can have multiple servers here. So I think there's something there on using games. I'm big these days on using games as a way to expand the crypto audience outside of this kind of DeFi degenerate, like hardcore user, right? Because you kind of, by putting crypto in the context of this game, I think it makes it much more accessible. And, I have like kids myself where they're playing like Minecraft all day long, right? My kid wanted a special mouse with grip tape so he could so he could hit the button really fast. I mean, people are really into this stuff. So I think that this is, it's just interesting to me to see these kinds of developments, grassroots. And I suspect that, this is going to be a big driver for adoption, this year.
Absolutely. So do you have any advice for entrepreneurs that are trying to get into the blockchain space? Like what trend they should focus on? We have already seen multiple layer ones. We have already seen some of the infrastructure play like EVM kind of developing. What do you think will be the next opportunity in terms of a trend that market at the moment is kind of ignoring? And it could be as big as, let's say, DeFi or metaverse gaming and NFT. Like, is there any particular trend that you're very bullish on, which can also kind of happen within Moonbeam or maybe perhaps outside?
Yeah, I mean, I would say that I would just echo some of the places we're seeing traction are obviously the things that I'm most familiar with. So I still feel like, DeFi sometimes it gets, I think it gets relegated a bit because it's like, yeah, that's what happened last summer. And, this is kind of yesterday's news, but, there's still like a lot of growth potential, left in this, in that sector. But I think it's the games are definitely the area that seem to be, games / metaverse seem to be the thing of the moment. The trick though is this though, that when you're coming into something, to build a project of any substance takes, let's call it it might be as much as we've been working on our thing for over 2 years now. So it takes some amount of time to build something of substance. So I think there's a bit of danger in targeting something that's hot like at the moment, because by the time you actually, if you come in and build the thing, that you're in danger maybe of that thing being kind of passed. So for us, I mean, from my perspective, you can never go wrong if you look at areas that are growing and then focus on like required infrastructure that's required to support that growth. And so that was a little bit of our bet was, you have this new ecosystem in Polkadot, you have this powerful substrate technology, but there's other things that are other critical infrastructure is needed there. A smart contracts platform is needed there, right, to fill out the gap. And we saw that as early as that was in that was more than 2 years ago, basically. And so I think, yeah, I mean that's a bet that like doesn't change that much, right? Maybe the use cases can change, but the fact that you're going to need this infrastructure to help power things is a pretty safe bet. So yeah, that was at least our bet and how we approach that same question.
Amazing. I also wanted your thoughts on the token utility on Moonriver and like Glamour and Mover. So do you think like network effects can make the token very deflationary? Because we have seen with some other projects, like let's say to name one of the competitors, Aurora, their focus in terms of the token utility was just governance. And I know both Moonriver and Moonbeam token, like Glamour and Mover, they both have multiple utility. So just walk us through like some of the utilities of the token and how it can become extra deflationary going forward, especially if we achieve strong network effects.
Yeah. So the deflationary part is that there is a burn mechanic built into both Moonriver and Moonbeam. 80% of any paid fees are burned. So as utilization on the network goes up, there is this deflationary pressure in the system that kind of counteracts some of the new issuance that's happening to power things like our staking functionality. But yes, so that's one characteristic of the system that's interesting. In terms of utility, there's for the underlying platform token, there's 3 or 4 main areas of utility. So one is the base kind of gas use case, right? So just like ETH on Ethereum provides a gas token for smart contract execution on the system, the same thing is true of the Mover and Glimmer tokens. They are the gas token of the system. And that's probably how most people are using the token in a utility function. There is also a staking component, though. So there is a staking implementation we've done to help power the selection of what are called collators. Collators are block producers in our system. And that's actually turned into something that's a great strength of the network, where there's a quite active community that we have of node runners now that are performing this collation service. And they're just highly engaged in the network. They're supporting each other. It's really great to see the expansion of that community. And so but that's also powering a critical function for the network, how it stays alive, basically the liveness property of the network. And governance, I would say, is a third area where, like many other parachains, we have an on-chain governance system that uses the token for token-weighted voting. But there's a fourth category that isn't talked about as much, which is cross-chain like interactions. So there are some fees that are related to cross-chain interactions, and those would also be paid in the native platform token. So those are the different sources of utility. I think most people are interacting or using the token in its like a gas utility function, but I expect, for example, the governance functions to become more important over time, and certainly the cross-chain use cases as well.
Yeah, I'm personally very excited about the token utility. I think it has a well thought out token utility, and like for me, it was one of the reasons why I was extremely bullish on Moonriver and Moonbeam. So it's very good that the token utility is well thought of, that kind of gets me excited going forward, because I feel the token will have very low velocity within the network. So Derek, like it's an amazing project. I'm extremely bullish on it. Token Metrics also likes it. I just wanted to discuss some of the risk you see to the success of Moonbeam, Moonriver. Mm-hmm. So it would be like interesting to kind of have a balanced and humble view. So what do you see some of the risk for Moonbeam, Moonriver?
I think the risk all along has been that we obviously made this kind of all chips in bet on Polkadot and Substrate. And so I think those were two, Polkadot's launched now, but imagine for most of the time we were developing, they hadn't even been launched all the way. And so that's where in the early days, there was quite a lot of technical risk, I'd say. On the Substrate side, this is a very powerful framework, but it was also evolving very quickly. So that was one risk area. And then, for Polkadot as a system, it's well designed, well thought out, but it's also quite complex. I would say it's one of the more complex systems, crypto systems, that's out there in general. And so there's always been risk associated with that. Now, the good news is I think that a lot of these things have been substantially de-risked now, like with the recent launch of parachains on Polkadot being one. When Kusama went live, that was another one. A lot of these XCM features have just stabilized within the last, let's call it 30 days or 60 days, and so some of the first features are coming out. But I would still call that we're quite like coupled together, right? So it's hard for me to see a future where Moonbeam is successful if, like, Polkadot is not successful, as an example. I mean, we have a shared destiny at this point. So that's, I think, probably the overarching thing that I would say, is the case. What else? What else can I say? I would say that we're also have made this like very large bet on the EVM, right? As we discussed before, and I mean, I have my thoughts that I shared around. I don't think it's going anywhere anytime soon. I still see 10 years from now, I'm pretty confident there's still going to be, EVM based like technologies like out there. That could be wrong. I mean, it could be the case that some other tech stack, comes to dominate. The EVM, becomes less relevant. Obviously, in a future like that, then the value of Moonbeam goes down, quite a bit. I don't see any signs of that happening, but crypto can always surprise you somehow. So I think that those would be, I'd cite those as two, risks that are things to think about when it comes to our project.
Just to share my thought, I think the latter risk for next few years, I like even long term, like 3 to next 5 years, I don't see that as a risk, because primarily there is a shortage of talent in the industry at the moment, and I don't feel like there's a shortage of auditors and security audits and so on and so forth, and majority of the people are comfortable with EVM. And if you kind of increase the shortage of talent as well, and you combine that with this, I feel like it will be one of the most dominating operating system for crypto. Even though there are some trade-offs, but I think it will be dominating just because there is a shortage of talent, and plus everybody knows how to use it. Everybody knows how to use it to kind of develop. So Derek, before we conclude our podcast, do you have any concluding thoughts or things we might have missed or we might have not discussed?
Well, I guess I could share a little bit of my thoughts on where I think things are headed in the next couple of years, and how we're thinking about things, positioning ourselves, and why we've made some of the choices we have. What I believe is the case is that there's going to be a big shift in how developers build applications over the next few years. And that shift is going to be that, to date, I think almost all applications were developed with this, what I'd call a monochain deployment in mind, right? So you develop something for an EVM, it was to be deployed to like a single EVM, right? It's like, let me deploy this like protocol, this game, this whatever it is, like to one chain. And so the big shift that I see happening is that, and you already see it happening, by the way. So you already see like people moving into like a multi-chain world, but it's pretty simplistic at this point, right? So it might be that take one of the project teams we work with is Sushi, right? So the team at Sushi has taken their DEX, and then they basically take the entire all the smart contracts and front end code associated with that DEX, and they deploy it to like multiple EVM chains. They have these deployments everywhere. But if you think about it, that's a pretty simplistic kind of model and it has shortcomings, right? So then you have basically users and liquidity that are kind of isolated like on these like different chains, right? And they can't really like interact with each other. So that's kind of the next frontier I see, is that people are going to start to build applications that are what I call natively multi-chain, right? They might span multiple chains, but be part of the same application. And so that's been a guiding principle for us, is to ask the question, okay, well, what is going to be needed like in that kind of future world? And this is where I think Polkadot has like some very, very good like characteristics to support applications of that type, because of the ability of these chains to specialize, and because of this like native like interoperability mechanism. So that's really where we're making like a big forward bet, is saying, yes, I mean, EVM is kind of this thing that we need to have all this great developer tooling, but we want to build these integrations so that you can have a native multi-chain application. And I'll give you an example, right? So an example of a team we're working with now is the team at Lido. Lido, you are probably aware, is one of the prominent protocols building liquid staking derivatives. They currently have the most adopted one on Ethereum now, with their ST-ETH asset. So they're looking to bring something similar to the Polkadot ecosystem. They want to make an ST-DOT product. And so the way that we've helped support them to do that is they have a dApp that's to be deployed to Moonbeam, but we've created like integrations so that they can kind of remote control staking functionality that's on the relay chain. It's on a different chain that's specialized for this like staking and security function, right, in the system. But then you realize that you kind of have this this app now that spans 2 chains, but it's offering like kind of one set of functionality to the user. But behind the scenes, it's employing 2 different specialized chains. So that's a really simple example, but that's the direction that I think things are going to move in, where you can kind of combine multiple specialized functions to create an application experience or something that's of service to the end user. And so that's my kind of longer ranging vision is, I'm interested in, if you think of like a Web 2 development experience, right? You go to like AWS, you log in, you have this whole like array of different specialized services that are extremely powerful. I want to see that same kind of power and ease of development, but with Web3 based services, right? So maybe I need like EVM functionality, I need staking functionality from the relay chain, I need like identity functionality from an identity optimized chain, maybe I need some data storage, to store some data, but you would kind of combine all of these things together into one application to present back to the user. So that's kind of my longer term vision, and that's why I think that Polkadot is a great like environment to build out like that kind of vision.
Yeah, that was very insightful, Derek. I agree. I also agree with that regard, especially when it comes to user experience and user interface. I think at the moment we are lacking on that, but I think going forward, if that improves, it could lead to like even more adoption, like at even a higher exponential pace. So Derek, thank you for coming to 100X. It was amazing having you. I personally learned a lot, and I hope our audience also got to learn some of the some of the functionalities that Moonbeam and Moonriver is bringing to the Kusama ecosystem. So thank you once again for joining us.
Yeah, thanks for having me.